Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started then. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Brian. I work here at the York County History Center. I'm glad the rain held off long enough for us all to come in this evening. Thank you all for coming to Allvets. I have just a few announcements to read before I introduce the man of the hour. This Friday, the 24th, the History Center is having its annual Art and Leisure auction. This is an event that supports the History Center here. It is happening from 5 to 9 down at the Industrial Museum, and it's also happening online. Make sure to check out our website for more details on how to participate in the event. The first Friday for October will feature something a little different from what we normally do. Down at the Colonial Complex, as part of what's going on downtown for First Fridays, we will be having s'mores that we'll be able to make over the campfire. We'll be offering spooky ghost walking tours of the city. So those will be leaving from the Colonial Complex. So if you're downtown, you may want to stop by where we are. I think you'll have a good evening. The Bonham House is still open for tours. If you'd like to, again, register for one of those tours, you can do so either calling to the front desk or just coming in the front desk and they can set those up. To my knowledge, the last one is this Saturday for now. And there'll be tours at 11 and 2 o'clock. These will be guided tours of the Bonham House. The next South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society meeting will be Sunday, October the 3rd. Nicole Smith, the director of the Library and Archives, will be going over different genealogy resources that are available at the York County History Center's Library and Archives. The next second Saturday program will be on Saturday, October 9th at 10:30. The topic will be Jim Abels will be discussing the National Guard of Pennsylvania from 1866 to 1900. Those are all the announcements that I currently have. And then make sure to come back for next October's Allvets, which I believe, Linda, is the last one for this year. For 2021. So the next month's Allvets will be the last one for this year. So make sure you come. And now I would like to introduce our speaker this evening, Bob Smoker, who will be introducing, or will be talking about his experience in the Vietnam War. Bob.
Well, I want to thank Ron for introducing me to this, and thank you to Linda for inviting me, and thank you for coming. I think I'm going to go by the slides to make the presentation to discuss, and hope you bear with me. I was born and raised in York. I have a brother, and my mom and dad, we lived on East Philadelphia Street. You know where the Lincoln Highway Garage is on Market? Well, that's a 1200 block. We lived in the 1100 block of Philadelphia Street. So we were on the Lincoln Highway going west. And I went to York High. I was in the industrial program. You remember the industrial program at York High? I was in machine shop. And when I was in 11th grade, Vo-Tech was started. And my understanding is that people who were in the machine shop or in the industrial program automatically went into Vo-Tech. And so in 11th grade, I was a Vo-Tech student. Halfway through, I got a job working at Alto Corporation. So I went to academic classes 2 weeks and then went to Alto Corporation working a machinist apprenticeship for 2 weeks. A great program. I did that all of 12th grade also. And then I got a scholarship from GTE Sylvania to go to Williamsport Area Community College for toolmaking technology. After the first year, I realized, wow, this is really very much the same as Vo-Tech. And I talked to the folks at Sylvania, and they agreed that maybe it's a waste of time. But they said, start the second year, go back second year, and if it is the same again, then we'll just start your apprenticeship. So that's what happened. Then after a few months, I got drafted.
Oh, no.
Because, because I had had a student deferment, I couldn't get a deferment like all the apprentices did. And I got drafted then. So in in May of '69, I was drafted. In October, I went to Vietnam, but before basic training, after basic training in New Jersey at Fort Dix, I went to infantry school at Fort Lewis, Washington. And that's what I looked like 50 years ago. We were loaded up, getting ready to be taken out to the mountains. Now, my time in Vietnam was all in mountains. And we did a lot of hiking with that stuff up and down mountains. I thought I was in pretty good shape. I played football in high school. Basic training was easy. Infantry training was pretty easy. And when I got there, I remember in infantry school thinking, wow, the real thing can't be as bad as this. I think I spent the first 2 weeks going up and down, up mountains on hands and knees. The time of my time in Vietnam, October of '69 to October of '70, largely revolved around this place, Fire Support Base Ripcord. They were making a jump towards the A Shaw Valley. Anybody ever hear of the A Shaw Valley? That's where Hamburger Hill was. In fact, Hamburger Hill was May of '69, which was just a few months before I wound up in country. And we made a helicopter combat assault one place, and the pilot pointed out we were flying by Hamburger Hill. Well, this place called Fire Support Base Ripcord was just outside the valley. And there was one of several mutually supporting artillery bases to make an offensive to interrupt the flow of supplies and people from North Vietnam to the populated South. This is the kind of terrain, beautiful country, but look on the right in here. That's all bomb craters. The whole place was cratered. This right here is an LZ landing zone. And maybe you remember seeing pictures and movies of a bunch of helicopters landing at one time and taking off. Well, our landing zones were all one ship. So one would come in, take off, another one right behind him, take off. And then we would walk those mountains. I want to show you a little clip from the movie Hamburger Hill. And this will give you some idea of our form of transportation. Now it shows 2 helicopters landing at one time, but we only did one at one time. One at a time. Now, by the way, it was the 101st Airborne, and that's the division I was with. That was Hamburger Hill. And so this is very much like what we did. So I was drafted, and I had no intention to go in the Army. I had no intention to be infantry. I had no intention to go into an airborne unit. I never jumped. The 101st was transitioning to air mobile, now called air assault at the time. So I was just one of replacements and was in infantry. I was in Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion of the 506th Infantry, 101st Airborne. The 506 is the regiment that Band of Brothers was all about. So Fire Support Base Ripcord, a key place that soon became the focus of large numbers of North Vietnamese soldiers trying to wipe it out. March 12th, there was an unsuccessful assault. Americans assault the hill to take and set up a base. April 1st was another unsuccessful assault. They referred to that as the April Fool's Day assault. April 11th, my company assaulted the hill. There wasn't a shot fired, so we gained control of the hill, and then my company stayed on the hill to build the defensive positions and be there for security when the artillery pieces were brought in. And then we would go out into the jungle, and another company from the battalion would pull security, and we would just rotate them like that. July 2nd, 902, Hill 902. There were 2 platoons plus the command post. And a few days before this, I was put into the command post in order to take care of supply for the company in the field. The command post was made up of the captain, his 2 radio operators, the company head medic, a forward artillery observer, and his radio operator, and myself being the supply guy. And we would set up more in the middle of the perimeter, and the others would be in fighting positions around the perimeter. Now, we had never stayed in the same place more than one night at a time. And I only remember one other time when we actually dug in. But this night we dug in and stayed 2 nights there. And the problem is, it gives the enemy plenty of time to study your positions and to know where everything is. Well, in the early morning hours of July 2, about 4 o'clock, a sapper company, sappers were highly trained soldiers who could slip under the wire on a fixed position like the artillery base. We have wire strung around, barbed wire. And then on top of that, rolls of concertina barbed wire. And these sappers were slick. We had a demonstration once. It'd only be a few inches off the ground. And they would have 2 sticks and a satchel charge is electric. high explosive charges that they would carry. And they'd be on their back, and they'd reach up and prop the wire up, then move, reach up and prop the wire, and they could get in underneath the. Well, they were expecting that the attack was going to come onto ripcord that night, and they positioned our company, not all of us, there were about 60 of us, on 902 so that we could observe where enemy fire was coming from, artillery or rockets and mortars, and then call in counter battery fire on those positions. That's what the regiment or the division was expecting. But what actually happened is, instead of hitting the fire base, they hit our position. They had some intelligence that came, but never made it to the field, that the enemy was going to attack us. There were a lot of casualties that night, and they got inside our perimeter, but we were able to fend it off and beat them away. If it wouldn't have been for the massive fire support that we had, it would have been a totally different story. But we had Cobra gunships, helicopters come and fly the perimeter. And there's something else. They have a couple miniguns, and the miniguns would fire so rapidly. At nighttime, the tracers just looked like a solid line. Normally, every fifth round is a tracer, so that at nighttime you could see where your rounds are going. But it'd be every fifth round. But in a minigun, it just looked like a steady line and sounded like a chainsaw. And if it wouldn't have been for them, we would have been in much more of a heap of trouble. So our company was down in size pretty much then. The situation, because Hamburger Hill had only been months before this happened, a year before, the division was very, very careful about losses. And they kept news media away. They didn't want the negative as had been done with Hamburger Hill. They didn't want a repeat of that. And I've come to learn that towards the end of the ripcord operation, the division was limiting the amount of ammunition. Can you imagine that? They put a limit on the amount of ammunition, artillery shells, and not only that, they limited the amount of blade time that the helicopters could fly. And so the position of ripcord really became very untenable to maintain. But we back up, and July 7th, Delta Company of Battalion assaulted Hill 1000. Hill 1000 was very close to ripcord and a little bit higher. So it was important to get that away from enemy control. And Delta Company assaulted that hill on the 7th during the day. And it turned out there was far more and more strongly entrenched enemy than what they anticipated. And they took some casualties. In fact, there were 2 that they could never get back to recover their bodies. So the following day, Delta and Charlie, my company, we were put together for a joint attack. And Delta Company was going to go back up the hill the same side that they went the previous day. And my company was to go circle around and come up the other side. Hill 1000, it consisted of a saddle with a high point, another high point, and then a low in between. They were to take the one saddle, and we were going around to take the other saddle. And we got to the top of our objective, but the fire was, the captain described it as withering. And we couldn't advance any further. And the Delta Company never made it to their objective. We couldn't take Hill 1000. We went up with 30 guys, and after the attack, we wound up having 19 that were able to stay in the field. So that was a major move that led to the downfall of the fire base. July 21, Delta and Charlie again combined to rescue another company, Delta of the first of the 506. Now we were Delta and Charlie 2nd Battalion, the 506, and Delta of 1st Battalion of 506 was in deep trouble, and they couldn't get out. The LZ, the landing zone where they were located, a helicopter had been shot down. Actually, it crashed. The captain of Delta was coming out to the helicopter, and the helicopter crashed, went on its side, and the blade cut him in the air. They couldn't come out. They couldn't get out on their own. So Delta went in on a ridge line above, and Charlie followed and secured that LZ, while Delta went down the ridge line to get the other Delta company and come back up. And this was a long deal. By the time the last helicopter, actually before that, it got dark, and we put a strobe light in the middle of the LZ so the helicopters could locate us coming in after dark. I was on the next to the last helicopter out, and the last helicopter out was taking fire from the NVA coming up the hill after. July 22, the next day, Alpha Company. They ran into the biggest difficulties of the all-on-top operation. There's a company, and all the companies of the battalion now were vastly understrength. They weren't sending replacements frequently. Once in a while, they would send replacements, but not very often. And so Alpha Company, like the rest, were understrength. And they were in a valley following, and they found a wire. They had a Vietnamese interpreter with them, and he tapped into the wire and said, "Buku Vietnam, Buku NVA, Buku NVA," just a ton of NVA in the area. And it turned out they were surrounded by a huge enemy force. And the only way they escaped was the captain, Chuck Hawkins, called in a bomb drop on their own location. 2 500-pound bombs were dropped on their location. And he had everybody down. When the bombs came in, he said you could hear the fins open, pop when they opened. And the bombs took everything out. And the bodies everywhere in the NVA. Well, Delta Company, 2nd 506, they also went to help Alpha Company get back out. So July 23, Ripcord was evacuated, was taken out. Equipment was burned, smashed, artillery pieces were destroyed so that the enemy could not get anything useful. And after all the Americans were back at the rear, the place was leveled with the B-52. I say leveled, it wasn't, it's still very high. It was about 4,000 feet elevation. So that's Fire Support Base Ripcord. Anybody know what April 30, 1975 was? That ring a bell? Yeah. Jesus. That's the day. That's the day the North Vietnamese stormed in to the presidential palace in Saigon. They call that reunification day because they reunified the entire country, or Liberation Day because they liberated the Southerners. I stayed around in country till October of 1970, but after Ripcord, I don't remember much of anything to talk about. Ripcord was by far the biggest thing that I experienced. And I mentioned Chuck Hawkins. When he was a West Point grad, and after he got out of the Army, he continued working for the Defense Department as a contractor doing research, historical research of battlefields and so on. And he said that you could look at the archives and there's information in the 101st archives up to a certain point. Then there's a gap and then it picks up again. That gap was 1970. But he said that there's two bookend battles to the Vietnam War. The first one is the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. You hear of that? Maybe We Were Soldiers and Young, Mel Gibson movie. That's the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And the last one, bookend, was the Battle of Ripcord. And they're bookends because these are two full-scale, full-size unit engagements that kind of demark the beginning and the end. So in a nutshell, that's my Vietnam War story without getting into war stories, you know? When I came back, I was sent to Hunter Army Airfield. And I got the sense that I was the only infantryman on the base and they didn't know what to do with me. So finally, after a couple of weeks of just hanging around, they put me in flight operations and I kept track of the helicopters, the pilots. It's a place where they train helicopter gunship pilots, Cobra gunships. And so my job was to work the night shift when they went out to the range, went out firing. That's what I did for the last 7 months in the Army. But the thing about stories is if you just see the story, if you're just in the moment, you don't get a good picture. Anybody want to take a guess what that is? Yeah, it's the shoulder of that elephant. See? Perception is affected by whether you see the larger story or not. This, I don't know, a few years ago, I was in the city of Dalat in Vietnam. And I had a guide and we went out into the countryside. And this is outside the city of Dalat. That elephant's actually tied up, but we walked by. And that's a picture of him just before he smacked me in the butt with his trunk. And he knocked down my guide. And the guide told me when I stood in front to take his picture, he thought I was going to feed him. And I didn't, so he whacked me and knocked him down. And I think that that's a good illustration of perception. His perception was food. And wasn't there, he got upset. So we need to look at the bigger picture to get an understanding. And I'll say from my perspective, from my involvement in Vietnam, I'm okay with talking about the war, but I'd much rather talk about what's happened in Vietnam since then. That's the gate that the tank broke through. That's the palace. They've left the palace, they say, in the same condition that it was in 1975. At least the same things are there. The furniture in the rooms, I'm sure that they've done some cleaning. And in the basement is the bunker. So there's the massive telecommunication equipment there. It's antiques now. There's a war room where there's huge maps from the whole country and pinpointed where units were and where actions were happening. That's pretty interesting. But of course, you get the communist line and all of it. This is in Hanoi, Lenin, statue of Lenin, one of their heroes. This fellow, just maybe 3 years ago, was sentenced to 4 to 11 years in prison for a terrible crime. He was flying the flag of the former South Vietnam. So they imprisoned him for it. Imagine how it would be here in our country. I think it's interesting, the faces of the 4 soldiers, all very stern. The only one smiling in that picture seems to be the guy who was arrested. I've gone back to Vietnam. The first time back was in 2002. I was a pastor in Wrightsville. When I came home from the Army, I told you I was in Hunter Army Airfield. A fellow that I grew up with was working with a girl at Airborne. And he asked her one day, would you like to write to an American, to a soldier? And so she did. And that's how we met. And I say we dated through the mail from November to I got out the following May. Well, now we got married. And we're still married, almost 50 years. Yeah. She's the first one, along with, I returned to my apprenticeship after I get out of the Army. And the man that I worked with, excellent toolmaker, and her were the first people that told me about the love of God that I had never known before. And they told me, and I came to understand that faith is something of a personal relationship, a personal decision. And I never thought of it in that term. I went to church occasionally and all those sorts of things, but I never had it as a personal relationship. Now, I'm not going to use this as a place to preach, but I would be glad to talk with you further about that anytime, as much as you want. So I went back in 2002. I was pastor in Wrightsville, and I was called by my mission agency, my fellowship's mission agency. They were exploring the possibility of ministry in Vietnam and wondered if I would be interested in going. Up until that point, I'd never wanted to go back to Vietnam, never thought about going back to Vietnam. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I think I would like to go. So I went in 2002. And where the A Shau Valley is halfway from north to south in Vietnam. We went down to the south, the Mekong Delta. So the topography is completely different. This was flat and watery, and this is a picture. That picture was 2002. Some places in Vietnam, the pictures are still the same. Life is still the same. They're working their farm. Beautiful people. Beautiful country. After 2002, I came to love Vietnam. Love Vietnamese people. God had changed my heart. This is the entrance to the city called Gia Vinh. It says, Xin chào quý khách, which means welcome, special friends. This is a Cambodian or Khmer entrance. The Mekong Delta used to belong to Cambodia, but sometime in the 1800s, Vietnam annexed it. So there's a large population, a large proportion of the Mekong Delta is Cambodian. There, I always thought of racism as being white and black here in America. But after that trip, I came to realize there's racism and prejudice all over the world. In Vietnam, it's the Kin people, Vietnamese people, and Khmer people, or the mountain people as well. Friendly people. You should see this guy. He and his wife operate a stand of food. They're just open in the morning for breakfast. She fries eggs and different things like that. And they make soup and he delivers it on his motorbike on a tray like this. That's unbelievable. Pictures of scenery. My wife and I stumbled onto this place. We were there for 3 months. I taught a class of conversational English at the Foreign Language Institute, or Foreign Language Center. And it was night school. So during the day, we would take a motorbike and ride around. One of our favorite places would go outside of Ta Vinh town and sit by this waterway and watch the ferry come and go, and enjoy the kids. We had a great time. This special friend, he's Khmer. Well, all three of them are Khmer, Cambodia. This is my class that I had in 2012. Some of them university students. One of them was a high school student, but they all wanted to, practice with the Native American and work on conversational English. And our last day, they had a party for us at a pond called Square Pond. I don't have a picture of it here for you. It's a famous place in Ta Vinh area. After that time, we had I suggested to the Department of Education we have some English clubs for their English teachers, because they were dedicated in teaching English. But if all you hear is a Vietnamese person speaking English and it teaches the young people their version of English, you got an idea of what the English sounds like. How about we do some English clubs just for conversation to help them with pronunciations? And I had other Americans come to help me do that. And that's what this is, my wife and me working this. That's probably 2013. This lady is, she was the English specialist for the Department of Education. And she asked my wife and me to read these elementary books. And what it was a test for the students to listen and to read and so on. So we did that. We recorded that. This is the one group of teachers. I got to the point of believing that I could go anywhere in the entire province. And if I had any problem, I just could find a primary school. And the likelihood is that there'd be somebody there who would know me and could help me out speaking English, because they came from all over the province. Very friendly people, very friendly. I discovered, you know what this means? Peace. That's what we think of in peace. So I asked somebody once, well, why does everybody do that when you take their picture? The number 2 in Vietnam is Hai, Mo Hai, that pi means two. And so they're holding two fingers up to say hi. These are university English teachers. And the guy tutored my wife and me the 3 months that we were there. This is back out where the ferry boat crossing is. Some years after this, myself and a friend, we went out there to sit and get something to drink like normal. And this girl came out with a book and wanted me to read. Here it turned out to be the same thing that my wife and I read, and just amazing. We stumbled onto this bit of a store. They didn't speak English, we didn't speak Vietnamese, but very friendly. He even, after a while, went and got a couple coconuts. You can see it, that's what's in the bag, and cut the top off so that we can enjoy coconut while we were there. Now look closely at this. You see the smiling faces, and that is largely the reception that we get in Vietnam. Smiling faces. However, you can see one person in there. She looks very apprehensive. Yeah. We've never had any problem. I've never had any problems except for one guy. They changed the director at Foreign Language Center in 2014. And I was told I could no longer work there because he researched your history and found out that you were a soldier. Well, at the very beginning in 2012, I told them, I'm a Christian. I love God and I love people, and I want to do something good for the people of Japan. I said, I understand the role boundaries, and I won't use my position as teacher to push myself or my beliefs on anybody, but if they ask a question, I'll answer. And then I said, I also was a soldier here in 1969 and 70. I wanted to be completely open, so I didn't need to try and cover my tracks anywhere or hide anything. So this guy comes in. Everybody else in the school knew my history, knew what I was, but I think that maybe he had some personal hang up with it. But most people you talk to, that's 50 years ago. That's in the past. We moved on. This fellow is one of them. This man lives in Kansas City now. He was an officer in the South Vietnamese Army. In 1975, he became one that was sent to re-education camp. He was in re-education camp for 7 years. He escaped, went back for 2 more years. Now, we became very good friends. I don't know what year this was, but I don't have gray hair then. And we just became very good friends. And one time I told him about, this was just a couple years ago. I had a friend who lived in Nha Trang, that's up the coast from where we were, who was an interpreter for Delta Company. And he said he never went to re-education camp. I thought everyone went to re-education camp. He told me we were told to show up, bring clothing and food for maybe 3 days. 7 years later, he escaped. Well, my friend in Nha Trang never went to re-education camp. And so I was wondering, was this guy maybe not genuine? I asked him, what kind of questions can I ask my friend? He said, why? What difference does it make? Long time ago. So he moved on. This girl has become like granddaughter to my wife and me. She now is a nurse. She went to Australia. Her family went to Australia. She was one in the one of the class, and I'll close with this. We were there for these 3 months, and we thought maybe it'd be a good idea to buy a motorbike or rent one anyway. So we went to this, I think it was a Yamaha shop or something. And we went in, and nobody spoke English, the owner, and so he sent for his daughter, which was her. She spoke English and came out, and we became friends from that point on. And that night, she joined the class, and we've been close ever since then. I think that's it. What questions might you have? Yes.
Is anybody getting wounded or killed or made from mines and stuff left over? I know it's 50 years and that stuff was planted everywhere and then some.
I don't have any personal or
Never heard
first-hand.
of any story.
I've heard, but I don't heard very little. But I know that I believe that it does happen occasionally. I hear about it more in Cambodia. The ripcord is out in the middle of the mountains. There's no roadway to it. The only way there is to either walk or to go by helicopter. And one of the reasons why they don't want people out there is because they say unexploded ordnance. I don't know. They still have difficulty with Agent Orange, and our country is spending a lot of money to help with abating that. Large areas around Da Nang. In the museum in Saigon, some people call it Saigon, yet some it's Ho Chi Minh City. In the museum in Saigon, they have pictures, grotesque pictures of children who were born to Agent Orange parents. That's a very real thing. Very real. Yes.
So there's still Agent Orange in Vietnam. It's still there.
We dumped a huge amount while we were there. Plus, Da Nang is a big center because that's where a lot of it was warehoused. And they claim that it leaked into the ground there. When we lived out in the mountains almost all the time, almost all my time was in the mountains. We drank water from the streams. We drank rainwater. We'd have a poncho. We didn't have tents, but we would string a poncho up to sleep under and put a canteen cup at the corner so we could catch the rainwater at nighttime. So Agent Orange, yeah, all of us had our share of Agent Orange. All of us in that area anyway, yeah.
Do you have any physical medical issues? Agent Orange issues?
Yeah, got heart disease, heart issues, and diabetes.
My brother, I don't know the years right now, I can't always remember the years, but he was in Vietnam and he has Agent Orange medical issues.
Yeah. The first I heard about medical issues with Agent Orange was, that was probably 2004 or somewhere around there, saying that there's a large spike in our age group of type 2 diabetes,
Yes.
of people who've been in Vietnam.
Or-
Yeah.
Bunch of questions. When you pulled off of ripcord, number one, why did the Army pull off? Two, how did it affect you guys as soldiers who took that up?
Well, we pulled off because it looked like it was going to be too great of an expenditure of personnel and money to keep it going. I mean, we already lost taking Hill 1000. And that was very close. It was so close that the artillery didn't fire this way, fired straight. So they saw that it was something that was going to be untenable to keep going, lose too many people. We lost a whole bunch of helicopters destroyed and many, many, many more damaged. In July, that July 1 to July 23 period, there was like 75 guys killed with hundreds wounded. And you can't get around, I don't think you can get around the fact that public sentiment was so, by that time, turned against the war. The division said, no, we can't go on any further with it. How did it affect us? I don't know that I, in those days, thought about how it
I'm sure you were just happy to get out of it.
Yeah, that's a big thing. One of the sayings, at least in my time in Vietnam, was, it don't mean nothing. You remember that?
Yeah.
It don't mean nothing. And really, it meant a whole lot, but it was a way of covering, a way of hiding it. Did that answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Got another one. I'm so taken back, Bob, by the friendly faces that you depicted on the PowerPoint. And it evades me of how they have responded when we are still fighting the Civil War here in the United States. And then being communists, still enemies, so to speak. How did they, I know that you said there's another generation and they moved on. How did they do that? And how can we do that? Maybe there's no answer to that.
Well, I think that there's an answer. I found for myself, first of all, faith is a huge part. Second, talking about it. You know, I could be at church and I could be preaching and some kid crying or whatever, all kinds of stuff, and it didn't bother me a bit. But when I heard a helicopter go by, it's all I could take to keep from going to the window to look. Yeah. Going back, many people have gone back and found that it was helpful. No, I saw a ABC news crew went with Norman Schwarzkopf and some other veterans and Dan Rather, and they went to a couple battlegrounds where Schwarzkopf had fought. At the end of this maybe 20-minute documentary, Schwarzkopf says, the bottom line, the war's over. He said, the war's over. For me, the war's over, but it wasn't over until I came back, until I came here. That's a good statement. I think that for many people, it's helpful. I read this perspective. A guy says, he asks the tour guide says, I take a lot of Americans back to former battlefields, battlegrounds, and some of them become emotional. And the guy says, well, why do you think that is? And our Vietnamese soldiers don't seem to be affected as much as them. And the tour guide said, well, look at it this way. Suppose you and I love the same girl at the same time. And we both have good times and bad times with her. But you leave and go halfway around the world, and I stay and I marry the girl. We have a family together, we go through some hardships, we have good times. He said 20 years later, all you have is memories. Where her and I we've built a whole new history together. I think that that's the key, to build a new history of Vietnam. Now, not everybody can go back. And we're getting to that age where it's difficult to travel that far. But there is other ways to build a new history of Vietnam, because I hate to see guys that are just stuck in 50 years ago. Actually, our whole country is stuck in 50 years ago. So I speak at churches, and I think, it's safe to say that 95%, maybe 99% of the people here, when I say the name of the word Vietnam, the only thing they think about is that 10-year period, dark period in our history. But Vietnam is such a beautiful place, such a long history. In 2011, Hanoi celebrated its 1000th year anniversary of being the capital. Being the capital of Vietnam. But we don't know anything like that. I went to a bookstore in Vermont years ago. I asked the gal, "Do you have anything about Vietnam?" And she was quiet. "No, I don't." "Well, wait a minute. We have a book here written by a local telling about his story, his experience as a Marine. Now, I'm not looking for anything about the war. Do you have anything about the people, about the culture, about the history?" And she was quiet again, and then she said, "No, that's really sad, isn't it?" It is. It is sad. So, Ron, I think that one thing is to work on building a new history. And I think that that can be done by, even visiting a nail shop at Walmart and getting to know somebody personally. Yeah, Leonard.
The chain of command, how was the troops, how did they set the chain of command with the president on down? Seemed like Johnson was trying to run things from the White House, not knowing what's going on.
I don't know. I can speak on the company level and probably more on the personal level. From my first time with the company in the field, there was, I could see a marked difference in responsiveness to our commanders above us. By the time I left, there was a less of that kind of appreciation for our leaders. I know I looked at my lieutenants and my company commander somewhat in awe. Many of them were West Point graduates, and I looked up to them. However, they had their flaws. When we attacked Hill 1000, Captain Wilcox, and he's given me permission to tell the story. There were maybe 10 of us that made it to the front, to the top, and were on a line. And it got to the point where we had to withdraw. The scout helicopter said there was a large element maneuvering on us and we were to retreat. So we retreated. Somebody popped smoke and we ran to the smoke. And we went back to the ground, to the staging area. And then somebody came around and said, they want us to go back up that hill. And a bunch of us are refusing to do it. We're not going to go. And I was more afraid to disobey the command than to actually go. What turns out, unknown to me and others, Captain Wilcox, Lieutenant Campbell, and the colonel in charge of the whole place were on the LZ talking about going up, and Wilcox said, "I will not lead my 19 men back up that hill. I suggest we bombard it heavy tonight, all night. And then in the morning when our troops are fresh, then we'll do it again. But if you insist on us going up, I'm not taking my troops. I'll go by myself, but I won't take them up." I had complete trust in my commanders. And that demonstrated it, that it was well placed in Captain Wilcox. He was relieved of his command on the spot. And the colonel said, if he had not been a West Point graduate, I would have court-martialed him. But years later, the colonel who was the brigade commander, said, and at the point where he wrote this, he was a general. He said, a court-martialing Wilcox would have done Wilcox a favor, because the facts would have come out and he would have been justified in what he was saying and what he was suggesting. So I can only answer your question from a personal perspective. I respected my leaders, lieutenant and captain. And in my year, I had 5 different company commanders. On 902, company commander was killed instantly at the beginning of it. Anyway. Yes.
You kept in contact with your comrades in arms in Vietnam over the 50 years? A handful, or one, or not at all?
In mid 80s, some people got together and started an association, Ripcord Association, and they have annual reunions. And I've gone to a number of them. And that's where more and more was learned about it. And then a book was written about it. And then in 2004, Oliver North and War Stories did a segment on Ripcord, Screaming Eagles Under Siege. And I was invited to go up and interview with Colonel North, and quite an experience. So we've got the Ripcord reunion. The last 2, 50th anniversary, were canceled because of COVID. However, Charlie Company, 70, 71 guys have been having reunions also, and I've gone to them. And what they've set out to do is to go to each of the cemeteries where Charlie Company guys had been, didn't say that right, have gone to memorialize each of the Charlie Company guys who were killed in 70 and 71. I've gone to a couple of them. I've gone to one in Indiana, one in West Virginia. And coming up next month, I'll be going to Mississippi and Alabama to do a memorial for 2 guys. And often they found out that family members have never had any contact or any input, any report from their son's death. They've just got the notification, no information as to how or when or any of that sort of thing. And so to do these memorials and go, and every time there's somebody who served with that person and are able to make a personal connection with them has been very, very, very good, helpful. Did that answer?
Yeah.
What's the name of the book?
There's been a number of books written. The first one was Screaming Eagles, Ripcord Under Siege. That's the same name as the Oliver North segment. But since Oliver North wrote, since Keith Nolan, he wrote that book, Screaming Eagles. General Harrison and Colonel Spaulding have made 2 trips back to Vietnam to interview their opposing officers. So General Harrison interviewed and tried to learn, they learned a lot from the North Vietnamese perspective. And he wrote a book called Hell on a Hilltop that is looking at Ripcord from the North Vietnamese perspective. But they discovered that the troop strength of the North Vietnamese was far more than what the division understood or estimated. So North said that we were outnumbered 4 to 1, but it was much greater odds than that. Yeah, Ron.
Observation and question. Observation is, you were teaching English post-war in country. Observation is that we here in Pennsylvania, believe it or not, have a Pennsylvania accent. Yeah, we do. We have an accent. So I'm just wondering, it's just an observation. That would have been something we would have probably brought to the people that are now learning English in Pennsylvania Dutch style.
One of the things I did was to play clips from somebody in Maine and somebody in North Carolina to show that.
And then the question, you have something on your shirt, reboot.
Oh.
What is that about?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. The 101st Airborne is based in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Some years ago, perhaps 10 years ago or so, one of the doctors, PhD, working in the traumatic brain injury and PTSD clinic, noticed something. She recognized that all their efforts that they're doing to help soldiers get past it, they're good, but there's an element that's missing, and that is addressing the moral injury, the soul wounds of combat. So her and her husband developed this 12-week course to address those things. And now it's spread all across the country, Reboot. And they have Reboot classes on campus, on the post. Issues like guilt, false guilt, forgiveness, unforgiveness, the roots of trauma, and the fruit that comes from those roots. I've helped lead a number of Reboot. Had one started in the prison, but that's closed down because of COVID. That's right. Lynn.
The Vietnamese people there, Steve, was so friendly to you. I assume that they, under communist rule,
Yeah.
the Vietnamese people in there who were sold and so forth, they welcomed in the same, I guess, the same character as what you are. Animosity toward the Vietnamese soldiers.
Oh, yeah, there is animosity between the communist side and the soldiers that fought for the South. Yeah, that's a good question. For instance, in Chavin, there I saw him a number of times, a guy that was maimed badly. His only way of getting around was basically laying on a skateboard and using his hands to propel himself. So I asked my friend, the guy that I said that was in the education camp, re-education camp, I said, can we do anything to help that man? And I was told he was a former South Vietnamese soldier, and the government won't do anything to help. Yeah. The North Vietnamese, the communist soldiers' graves are very elaborate and well cared for. Graves of South Vietnamese soldiers are run down. Yes.
Just kind of an observation, what you were mentioning, that one picture where you had all the smiling faces and the older lady in the back, with the
Yeah.
crown and spout. Maybe the age difference is some of the difference that the younger people have accepted it. I don't know how old that lady may have been, but she may have lived through it.
Yeah.
May have animosity.
Yeah, that's
That's
true.
an observation. I'm just saying
And the
that.
younger people who go through the schools, like what we talk sometimes about our government schools, well, that's definitely what it is there. They get the perspective of the government in their education in regards to the war and Americans. However, they do like Americans. They welcome Americans.
You ever notice how much clothing is made in Vietnam now? Maybe that's why they like it.
Well, there's that. But, well, I have a friend who's a tour guide. And he talks about different nationalities that he works with. And he said Americans are much more friendly than other nationalities. Well, I don't, I welcome and glad to talk and answer more questions or try to answer. That's one thing I've learned. I knew a whole lot more about Vietnam in 2002 when I went the first time than I do now. It's a mysterious country yet, a lot of different angles. And so at the beginning, somebody can go and think that they know a lot. I've learned a lot. I've been to Vietnam. I looked around for 2 weeks. But the more I've learned, the more I realize I don't know a whole lot about it. Yolanda.
There's much American equipment there left behind, much there that's used to the Vietnamese.
I don't know if there is a lot now anymore, but I was told that in the north, where the communists, where the Russians had built buildings, they didn't hold up as long as well as American buildings. I've been told that we like American equipment much better than Russian or Chinese equipment. For instance, a helmet, much better made than the other helmet. I don't know how much equipment.
Well, you see it in many places where like just separate, whatever, it's not very obvious.
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate your question.
Thank you very much.